June 1st, 2004. A sixth grade teacher was getting her students ready for the lunch period. They were chanting itadakimasu, which is like an expression of gratitude before eating, when she noticed two students were missing. Now, before she could go looking for them, one of the missing students appeared at the door to the classroom, covered in blood and holding a knife. Of course, the teacher rushed forward, making sure the student wasn't injured, but what she didn't realize at the time was that this child, later known as Nevada-tan, had just become the youngest killer in Japan's history. Now, the teacher immediately went and examined this student for injuries. She's holding something sharp. She seems to have blood on her. She's looking to make sure she didn't hurt herself. And the girl said, "No, it's not my blood. It's not me. It's not me." Some reports say the girl pointed to a study room down the hall, and that's where the teacher would find the victim. She was there laying on the floor with her throat cut, and while she wasn't dead, she was barely alive. So the teacher yelled out for someone to call emergency services, and she began trying to stop the bleeding. Less than 10 minutes after the girl had arrived at the classroom with her box cutter, the vice principal would enter the study room and find the scene of the teacher trying to keep this student alive. The vice principal is the one who actually ended up calling emergency services and requesting an ambulance, but the dispatcher said he was so panicked that it was difficult to understand because he was having so much trouble articulating what was going on. They ended up dispatching an ambulance to the school from a police station about 4 kilometers away. But by the time the ambulance arrived at 12:51 p.m., the victim had already died. How does an 11-year-old even come to commit such a violent crime? How does someone murder in cold blood at such a young age? What actually went down in that room? To answer these questions, we have to dig a little deeper and try to ultimately understand the why behind one of Japan's most infamous crimes. During a 40-minute interrogation by the police in the principal's office, the girl who would later become known as Nevada-tan admitted to the chain of events and what actually took place. And the details are pretty strange. First, it came out that this was not an accident. It was a premeditated murder. She said, "I prepared for this on Saturday and I planned to kill her on Monday, but I thought I would be discovered too easily, so I did it today." She called the victim out of the classroom into the study room where she would find the curtains drawn, where she would be forced to sit, and Nevada covered her eyes with her hand and slit her throat. She said, "I hesitated between stabbing with an eyeletier or strangling with my hands, but I opted for the more reliable box cutter." Now, if you're not sure what an eyeletier is, you use it to poke a hole in fabric, leather, to lace things through it in the process of clothing design usually. So she considered using that, but opted for the more reliable box cutter. She said, "I covered her eyes and cut her with my left hand." This didn't kill her. The victim got up and tried to fight back, and as a result, she got a deep cut on her hand as well. So when they found her, she had a slit throat, but also a deep cut on her hand, which was a defensive wound. After the victim finally fell after a struggle, the killer spent about 15 minutes cleaning up the blood splatter and making sure that she was no longer moving. She said, "I waited until the victim's death could be confirmed. Then I returned to the classroom to avoid suspicion." So she wanted to make sure that there was no saving this girl. But also, what isn't suspicious about showing up to class in bloodied clothes, holding a weapon? But above all of that, it's just unbelievable to think about an 11-year-old murdering someone. What drives someone to that point? What reason does someone that young have to do something so terrible? Not that there's ever justification for murder, but when we're dealing with an 11-year-old murdering a 12-year-old, there's something surreal about it. And the thing is, Nevada and her victim were not enemies. They were friends. They were classmates. They were seen together all the time. They had an online website that they ran together. It didn't make sense Furthermore, all signs initially pointed to Nevada being just a normal student, kind-hearted, diligent. She actively participated in class. She showed dedication to improvement of hobbies if she wasn't satisfied with her skill level. Her family praised her. Her father, who had been sick, said that she was very kind and she always had an encouraging word. And her brother said they always had friendly conversations and they played video games together. And even just days before this incident, she seemed very playful and very friendly. But as the investigation continued, some cracks began to show in this initial appearance of Nevada. We have to remember that this was the early 2000s. The internet was less regulated, less explored, especially by children. And Nevada, like a lot of kids her age in middle school, was drawn to those unexplored places on the internet. She would frequent forums and websites that sometimes glorified violence and manga with adult themes. And this exposure to more graphic content may have desensitized her to violence, distorted her understanding of its consequences. But beyond that, and in retrospect, there were signs of Nevada's change in behavior. Her fascination with violence wasn't just confined to the internet. Teachers and peers had noticed changes in her behavior, from her becoming more and more withdrawn in the end of 5th grade, kind of exhibiting more antisocial behavior. She wasn't able to make eye contact with people. She was seemingly very uneasy around people. But not just that, also explicit artwork. And she had expressed at one point the desire to become a novelist or a manga artist. And she created a story where 38 classmates had to participate in a deadly conflict. Some of those classmates in this fictional story had names that resembled her actual classmates. And one of the characters that actually dies in the story had the same surname as her eventual victim. But it wasn't just withdrawing from social aspects, and it wasn't just the art, the writing. She also started to exhibit violent behavior toward male classmates, and it seemed like anything set her off. Like the most trivial of situations could trigger her to do something violent. So Nevada had become more withdrawn. But what happened between her and this person she used to be friends with to escalate into murder? First of all, Nevada and this girl began their acquaintance like most school-age kids do. They were in the same school, they shared lunches together, and they found out through normal conversation that they had some shared interests. They were often seen laughing together and just commiserating over the pressures of school life. But note that I said common interests. Nevada and her friend were both online a lot. They both had an online presence, and as their friendship developed, so did their engagement with the internet. The girls, particularly Nevada, found themselves increasingly immersed in online communities, and they even created their own space online where they did a sort of diary exchange. Now, I don't know if that's just like a blogging back and forth type thing. When I was in school, we would like write in a notebook and pass it to a friend, and they'd write back and we'd share our day that way. So I'm thinking something like that, but I don't know. The problem is when you're immersing yourself in these online spaces, it's too easy, especially back then, to be introduced to themes way too mature for your age group, or even just things you're not looking for. On top of that, a lot of these spaces are anonymous. In addition to online spaces offering a privacy and maybe a freedom to say things you wouldn't normally say in person, it can also lend to promoting a more aggressive space, because when you're behind a screen, you're not going to get punched in the face. You know what I mean? Despite appearances, people that knew the girls said that their relationship was complicated. It was within these digital spaces where the first cracks in this friendship began to grow. Online arguments, fueled by the kind of impulsivity that being behind a screen can foster, began to spill over into their real life interactions. The content of these disputes were mostly trivial matters, typical of their age, but some of these things were a little bit more serious and gave way to issues about jealousy and competition between the girls. And while these disputes seemed so trivial and so innocuous, comments on social media posts or just differences in opinions, the more it happened, the more it began to erode their friendship. The transition from trivial online disagreements to significant fallout was gradual, but obvious to everyone around them, everyone close to them. Nevada's friend, maybe feeling slighted by the online exchanges, might have responded in a way that made Nevada feel further alienated. Meanwhile, Nevada herself was growing more and more fascinated with these darker areas of the internet. She was engaging in forums that normalized violence, and maybe that warped her perception of conflict resolution. I think we can all agree that the internet, at least in 2004, was not built to equip a young girl with the skills needed to handle real-world disputes rationally. One of the real-world disputes may seem ridiculous, but occurred during a piggyback ride. The girl who would become Nevada's victim gave her a piggyback ride, and upon initiating this, made a comment about how Nevada was too heavy. Now, I think we've all been there, especially as kids, and it's not a malicious thing usually. I can't speak for everyone, but when someone jumps on your back and that initial feeling of, I don't know if I can do this, that you're so heavy isn't necessarily meant to harm. It's probably more like a knee-jerk reaction of, oh my God, how am I going to keep myself upright while carrying another human being? I can't speak for this specific situation, but I'd be willing to bet that it wasn't meant maliciously. Nevada, however, took it really hard. She let that fester and grow within her into a grudge that led to murder. The culmination of these somewhat minor disputes plus the influence of violent content all mixed together in this toxic brew that poisoned their friendship. After all of these conflicts occurred, at one point Nevada asked her former friend via someone else. She didn't have the guts to say it to her face, but she asked her to leave the online community that they had started together. Now, this is only half of the story, because what makes this one so unusual is that Nevada-tan became an internet meme, like a sensation online overnight. And why? What happened? Why did this child killing become this crazy viral sensation? What is Nevada-tan and where did this all come from? Well, in the beginning, all of the case notes, all of the media coverage, everything referred to this killer as Girl A. And that's very common when it comes to a crime when minors are involved. I think even today, if you were to find the case files on this murder, it would probably still show Girl A. But in the, what I would say, sloppy handling of the media coverage where this case was involved, the girl's real name was accidentally revealed. What happened from there is a photo was discovered of the killer, and in it she was wearing a University of Nevada sweatshirt. And the internet took that and ran with it. They created a whole persona around this killer, this Nevada-tan. And tan is like an affectionate Japanese suffix, like chan, but it's more cutesy, like typically used for a younger character. The transformation of this killer into a character was viral immediately. It became a subject of fiction and digital art, and she was splashed all over online forums like 2channel, which is like 4chan, image boards, social media platforms, and it was just rampant with these different representations of this character of Nevada-tan, and it spread all over the place, all over the globe. And the concern about it, for the most part, was the way it kind of trivialized the crime. Nevada-tan was looked at as this fictional character, and it created this web of admiration and sympathy, and like I said, in some cases, idolization. Like, she's not the first person to have this kind of thing happen to her. She's certainly not the last. But when it comes to a situation where crimes are mythologized like this, it's almost like the reality of it is overshadowed by this character. I can't begin to imagine how this affected the victim's family. There was kind of a cult following that emerged, with Nevada-tan at the center of this complex narrative that went between condemning her actions and expressing empathy for her circumstances. Some people saw her as a victim of societal pressures and failing mental health support, while others were drawn to the macabre nature of the crime. There's something really strange about the internet's ability to both humanize and dehumanize a situation and a person. And in this case, it kind of blurred the line between the person, the killer, and the avatar that was created in the wake of all of this. In 2005, the store that sold the University of Nevada sweatshirt online reported that that sweatshirt was their best-selling item of 2004. When they found out why, several weeks later, they temporarily removed the sweatshirt from their online catalog. Now, what do you do with an 11-year-old who murders their own classmate? You can't stick them in jail with other criminals because they're too young. So what's the solution? Well, after her arrest, Nevada's case was immediately put into the spotlight, not only because of the crime, but also her age and the internet frenzy surrounding all of it. Under Japanese law, minors are subject to a juvenile justice system, and it emphasizes rehabilitation over punishment. Since Nevada was only 11 at the time of the crime, she was tried in a family court, and the case was kept private to protect the identity and privacy of young offenders, which, as we know, didn't actually happen. But that's the intention of these family courts. The trial focused on assessing her mental state and the circumstances leading to the crime rather than just the punishment. There were a lot of other factors that were revealed from experts during the trial, including psychological distress. There was an accusation of possible child abuse that was later proven false. They talked about the exposure to violent media and the potential bullying and all of these things that could have contributed to her actions. Ultimately, Nevada was found to be mentally disturbed at the time of the crime, and she was sentenced to be institutionalized in a medical reformatory. Now, there's a lot of stigma still in Japan when it comes to mental health, and especially back then. From what I understand, these child self-reliance support facilities were sometimes intended for children who had committed crimes, but also sometimes for children who they suspected would commit crimes in the future, like a preventative measure. So that's what she was put into, one of those facilities. After being placed at the facility, Nevada did not cause problems or show any rebellious attitude and was kind of described as a model student. She graduated from the facility's middle school in the spring of 2008 and left the institution and reintegrated into society. It's suspected that Nevada changed her legal name after her release and lives under a new identity. There's not much known about her life post-release, but as of today, she would be 31 years old. In the years following the incident, there were efforts to address things like reevaluating the support systems available to students in school and looking for stricter regulations on online content, and just aiming to combat things like bullying in schools, promote mental health awareness, and just providing better support networks. In the insanity that surrounds a case like this, when the internet runs wild and things get so sensationalized, it's easy for the victim of the crime to be overshadowed by the character that was created out of it. But understanding Nevada's victim is crucial to grasping the impact of the tragedy. So I think it's important that we take a minute to just shed some light on her life and the void that was left by her passing at such a tragically young age. In the heart of this tragedy is the story of the victim, the youngest of 3 children and the cherished only daughter of her family, was described as being a beacon of joy and potential to anyone who knew her. Even before she came into contact with Nevada, this girl's life was already marked with loss. In September of 2001, she lost her mother to cancer. Her mother's death left a huge void in the family, and with that and her oldest brother going off to college, there was kind of a strain on the previously close-knit bonds of the family. In April 2002, it seemed like a new chapter. She enrolled in a new school, the Akubo Elementary School, after her father relocated to the city, and it felt like a new beginning. New challenges too. There are always new challenges when it comes to moving, especially without their wife and mother. So less than 3 years after losing their mother, this family also lost the youngest daughter. Her father spoke out at a news conference and described his daughter's presence as like that of air, vital and life-sustaining, and said, "I cannot imagine life without her around me." He described the call from school officials, the frantic rush to her side, only to get there too late. These moments painted a picture of a parent's worst nightmare. Despite the challenges of raising his daughter single-handedly after her mother's death, her father expressed that he always wanted to provide her love and guidance and make sure not to spoil her. He did say that he had never heard of any problems at school from his daughter. So not that this wouldn't have come as a shock anyway, but to think of his daughter being happy and content at her new school, making friends without seemingly a care in the world, just underscores the shock of something like this happening to her. As we talk about this case and the unusual nature of the viral meme that it became, I just think it's important that we remember there was a victim involved. And while Nevada is free, that family will never get their daughter back. That was the story of Nevada Tan, Japan's youngest killer. Let me know your thoughts. Stay safe, stay curious, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.